Good day, everybody, and it's good to be with you again on this Thursday. This will be the last Thursday that I'll do the Gospel of Matthew discussion until after the first of the year. So next Thursday, the 21st, and the Thursday after that, the 28th, I will not be doing any discussion on Matthew. It's just a busy time of the year, and I want you guys to have that time to plan or whatever it is you need to do, get your gifts. I just know that everybody's busy, and I don't want to make your lives any busier, so we'll come back to the Gospel of Matthew discussion after the first of the year. However, today I want to look at Matthew 7, 1 through 6, and before you read that, I want to wish everyone a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and to remind you about the great things that are going on in church in the next couple weeks, and I hope to see you there also. All right. Look at Matthew 7, 1 through 6. Take a moment to read that and then come back. All right, I'll assume that you've read Matthew 7, 1 through 6, and very quickly you understand that this is about judging. Well, this passage is often mistaught just because people do not look at the broader context. In fact, if you just went down a few verses, and I'll talk about this later more, but Matthew 7, it's the same chapter, Matthew 7, 15 through 20, we are taught that we have to evaluate spokespersons or false prophets. So there are people out there who claim to speak on God's behalf, and we are called to evaluate those people because many of these people they don't have good intentions. They have vile intentions. In fact, the text, Jesus says they are wolves in sheep's clothing. And so they want to harm the Christian community, and we have to evaluate those people. So we are called to evaluate, but how we do it is important. And another thing about this passage that kind of upsets me is that non-Christians use this passage about judging to attack Christianity. And it's not fair. We are called to evaluate behavior. There's no doubt about it. And when they just throw this text out, again, they are not looking at the broader text itself, the broader context. Again, Christians have to evaluate. We have to. It's taught over and over in the New Covenant, but how we do it is critical. And this is what this passage teaches us a lot about how to do this. So, Matthew 7, 1 through 6. But now verses 1 through 2. Verses 1 through 2. They are really a linguistic masterpiece, to tell you the truth. Matthew has really outdone himself. In the Greek, and we can reproduce this in the English, not in the same with the same sounds, but in the Greek, the way that he's constructed this is with literary assonance. Assonance is the use of similar sounds in some kind of an expression. So it's generally the beginning of a word has the same sound. And that's exactly what's going on in the Greek. So in the first phrase, we have a same sound running through it. And the second, in verse 2, we have the same sound running through it. And so it makes this passage, Matthew 7, 1 through 2, very memorable to those who hear it. So remember, they were not a literary culture, meaning they didn't have written documents everywhere. They had a few, not very many. They were an oral culture. They had to hear the teaching. And so any way that a person could make that teaching more easily remembered was going to be helpful to the people for sure. So I'll read it to you, and our translations do a very, very good job. I'm not going to veer very much from it, but I might veer just a little bit. But let me read it to you. I'm just going to read it straight from the Greek, translated. So this is what Matthew says. He says, "Do not judge, so that you would not be judged. For in which you judge with judgment, you will be judged. And in which you measure with measure, it will be measured to you." And so that's the way that it sounds, and it has that those recurring sounds. And even in English, we can reproduce this. So it's it has a very a nice ring to it. Let's put it this way. Now, why does Jesus put this in here? We are still under the Old Covenant, okay? And so I'll probably go back and forth to talk about Christians and other things, but this passage definitely is a gateway passage moving into the New Covenant for sure. But we are still stuck in the Old Covenant, and I think Jesus actually uses this to warn people about the condemning attitude that the Pharisees had to so many people. In fact, they called the people the people of the land, the Hamarets, is what they called them, and it was a derogatory term. meaning that these people were not faithful, they weren't devoted, and if they would ever get devoted to God, then it would have a magnificent result upon the entirety of the nation. And that is true, it would have. But the people weren't so far off either as the Pharisees tried to claim. But the Pharisees were very condemning. We'll see this as we continue on through the Gospel of Matthew, that they did not like Jesus meeting with tax collectors and sinners, or the deplorables, what they considered to be the deplorables of society. They did not like that, but Jesus, these are the kind of people that Jesus hung around with. Now, he hung around with all people. He would sit down with Pharisees also, but he was not going to shun anyone from coming into his presence. And so, but the Pharisees were those kind of people. They would condemn and they would shun other people. Now, we are not to be condemning of other people, but we are to evaluate other people. We're not to condemn because it's not our role to judge other people. It's our role to share the gospel message to other people, bring them in and let the Holy Spirit begin to sanctify them, do the cleansing process in their lives. And so we're not to evaluate people. We're not to judge people. That's the role of God. He's the one who will condemn or reward people. That's not our job to do this. And so we have to learn how to evaluate other people's behavior with love and to help them with gentleness, and to be accepting of people. Love people, but don't love the sin. Or we often say, love the sinner, not the sin. That's the kind of idea that is important for us. Now, verses 3 through 5 give us an explanation. So now we find out 3, 4, and 5, it's not that we never judge. It says that we have to do it the right way. And so it's not, now Jesus is explaining, there are times that you have to do certain things, and when you do it, make sure you do it the right way. Now, it seems like in 3, 4, and 5, the person who's doing the evaluation of the other brother is not doing it with the right intention. It seems to be that probably the old idea of spiritual competition is probably coming up here. Everybody's like this. They want to promote themselves spiritually, and they do that by putting other people down. And that's kind of the idea that's going on here. Everybody wants to be thought of as a spiritual giant, I guess. In fact, they often forget that as a Christian or as any kind of covenant member of God, even under the old covenant, you have to be a humble person. And so this is obviously not a humble person. But there are times when we do have to evaluate. But the point is, in 3, 4, and 5, is that you need to fix your spiritual situation first before you go and start to try to fix other people's situation. And you notice that as Jesus is telling us, in fact, this is supposed to be very, very funny, the way that it's said by Jesus. It would have produced laughter for sure. But the idea is that the person is going to help out someone else when they have a greater problem in their own life, but they can't see it. That's the problem. And that's what happens to so many people, is they don't see the problems in their own life, but they are quick to see the minor problems in other people's lives. And that's what's going on here. And so it's interesting, in verse 5, he uses the term hypocrite. Now, he's been using this term throughout this Sermon on the Mount, but the word hypocrite is a word in Greek that just means an actor. It was a person who, if you would go to a drama, they had outdoor dramas where people would come out and they would put on a play. Those people who were putting on the play were called hypocrites. The word basically, if you broke it up etymologically, means by creation. And so someone has created a character and they role play that character. That's the idea. So now we can see that this person who originally wanted to fix this other person, they're just role playing. They're not even really, they don't have the right intentions. They're not sincere. And so there's a lot of problems here. But again, the person has to take care of their own spiritual situation before they can ever start to think about taking care of someone else's situation. And when you reflect upon your own spiritual problems, as is pointed out here, often your situation is far worse than someone else's. Take care of your own situation first, and then you can help out other people. Do it the right way. Evaluate in the right and correct way. Now, verse 6 explains it further. Now, some scholars separate verse 6 from verses 1 through 5, and some scholars add it. I think that verse 6 goes with 1 through 5 because I think it explains further about how you are to evaluate. And in this instance, it's talking about something that is of great value to this community. Now, if we think about some of the images, some of the animals used here, dogs, pigs. We know in a Jewish culture that dogs were considered unclean. They were not pets like what we have today. They were unwanted. They generally were wild, and they ran around and just ate trash rubbish. And so they weren't desirable. In fact, they're considered unclean. You know that pigs are unclean from old. So these two animals, pigs and dogs, are considered unclean under the old covenant. That kind of idea. So they wouldn't associate with these unclean things because if they did, it would make them unclean, or something that whatever they were doing, their purpose, their mission, their ministry, whatever, it could sully that, I guess. So it's talking about something that is not part of the covenant. They're metaphors. So the dogs and the pigs are metaphors for people who are unclean and obviously not part of the covenant community. Now, we got other things coming up here. We have holy and we have pearls being used. So what is holy? Don't give the dogs what is holy. What is holy? Well, at this point in the Gospel of Matthew, we've learned that anything associated with God is holy. So the Son of God that was coming into the world, a holy child. God is holy, so forth and so on. So we take that from what we've been given so far, that anything associated with God is holy, or the kingdom of God. That draws us back to the covenant kind of idea. Okay, and so what about the pearls? What are the pearls? Well, rabbinic teaching, when they taught and they would give some saying or some expression, often these were called pearls, thought of as being some kind of insights. Or also, as rabbis would string together Old Testament passages in order to make a point about some kind of claim they're suggesting. The string of Old Testament passages they would use were often called a string of pearls. And so it's the way that they're teaching and using the text is the idea of pearls. And so, again, we have something that's associated with the covenant community. Now, the last part is, lest they trample you under your foot and attack you. It would be the pigs that would trample you under their feet. They wouldn't appreciate what you have. They wouldn't appreciate you. And dogs would attack you. They didn't feed dogs out of their hands or anything like that. So there's danger here. And that's to be reinforced also. So the idea is this. There are some people out there who are unwilling to hear something from God. They have no respect for God. They do not honor God with their life or their thoughts or anything. They have no concern or whatever for God. And if you give them some kind of information about God, whatever covenant you're in, Old Covenant or in the New Covenant, we'll just say the New Covenant. If you give them information about Christianity, they may not be willing to accept it at that point. And they may mock you. They may mock the gospel message. They may mock God. In fact, it may make it harder the next time someone approaches them. So sometimes we have to look at a person's situation to see if they're ready. If they're ready to hear the gospel too. And so there are some times that we may not share certain things with certain people just because they're not ready at that point. Now, real quick, let me just talk to you further about evaluation, just real quickly. Some other passages you can look up, and that would be very, very helpful also about evaluation of other people's behavior. So the first one is Matthew 7, 15 through 20. I brought that up. So it's just a couple paragraphs after this. Jesus tells his disciples that they have to be on their guard for false prophets or false spokespersons. And he says the only way that you can tell if a person is false is by the fruit they produce or by their behaviors. And he says there's many people out there that have ill intentions. They're dressed as they're wolves in sheep's clothing, and they want to harm the covenant community for some reason. And we have to evaluate those people so that the Christian community is not harmed. There's a good example of why we evaluate people. Some people don't have the right intentions. Also, Matthew 18, 15 through 20 seems to plug in right into a new covenant community situation. And in this passage, this talks about if a person sins, you go to that person, try to help them understand their error and come to repentance. If they don't listen to you, you go back with 2 or 3, same process, and then if they don't listen to you, you take it to the church. And a lot of people have used this, not this way anymore, but about 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was this push to use this passage as a directive for Christian discipline. And nobody talks about it anymore this way because that was the wrong approach. It is about Christian discipline. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is the intent is not to punish people. The intent is to restore people. And some people approach Matthew 18, 15 through 20 with the mindset of, I'm going to punish people. Well, that's not the way it's supposed to be used, and it was mistaught that way. This is a passage about gently restoring people. In fact, I'm going to bring this up even more when we get to it. If we look at the Greek verb usage, it becomes very, very clear that there's lot more going on here. But again, I'm not teaching that this week, but Matthew 18, 15 through 20 does teach us about evaluating other people and gently restoring them back into the Christian community. And then also Galatians 6, 1 through 2. Also, this is a passage about gentle restoration. In fact, Paul says, if a sin is discovered in another person's life, you don't condemn that person, you don't shun them, you don't kick them out of the Christian community, you gently restore them, is what he says. So you bring them along, you gently restore them back into spiritual health, so that they're spiritually healthy again with God. So that's all I have today, and hopefully you found this to be very, very helpful. We are called to evaluate, but the way we do it is important. It has to be done with love. It has to be done with the desire to improve the person's situation, to accept that person. We always love the sinner and hate the sin. That's the key. Don't get it mixed up. We always love the sinner. Again, I hope you have just a wonderful Christmas and a happy New Year. And don't forget, we got some amazing things happening at the church the next couple Sundays, so I hope to see you there also. Take care. Bye.